Peoples of the worldwide federated internet. What's good? Sometimes I think about these things, and in my mind, I know I'm not the only one that thinks this. I'm not the only one whose mind travels in this way. I'm not some super unique dude, and I realize that. So I listen to a bunch of podcasts, you probably already know. And today I was listening to a gentleman that I've been following for a while. He kind of covers social and political topics. I follow him and I like listening because I think he gives an objective opinion. Many times I don't agree with him, and I kind of actually appreciate that about listening because as I hear his viewpoint, maybe there's something about his particular viewpoint I didn't understand. And then oftentimes I realize that maybe I'm seeing something incorrectly. I've noticed a change in him over the span of time I've been listening. I've probably been listening to him for about I want to say maybe 4 years or so. I'm not going to, mention who it is. That's kind of irrelevant cuz I've actually seen this happen to several people who I follow across many different aspects of social media. I follow all kind of pages. I follow watch pages, I follow political pages, comic book pages, sci-fi pages, gadget pages. I listen to all kind of stuff. But this particular person, I've noticed his opinion morph over the span of 4 years. When I first started listening, I noticed that he talked a lot about issues concerning different areas of morality. And when he started out, he was a bit more ambiguous. But I've noticed as time has gone on, he has gotten a lot more close to what the Bible teaches about morality. And I found that interesting. And what I find is as he discusses these topics without quoting the Bible, he is actually espousing biblical ideas, which I think is kind of interesting. But what I notice is he's noticing an agenda. But the thing I also like about how he approaches this is he doesn't necessarily approach it from some grand conspiratorial theme running through organizations, but he does notice a common thread, which that really got me thinking about something. And there was two verses in particular that stood out in this regard. He was talking about education and what students are being taught at very young ages and how loose public education is getting with teaching kids about sexually related things. I remember growing up, I don't remember exactly how or what we went over in school as far as the human anatomy and how deep they got, but I'm almost positive they didn't really go into the weeds about sex in general. They really kept it scientific with the human reproductive system, and everything else was left up to parents. I think that's how it should be. I don't think it should be. I don't think it should be up to the government to teach your kids about moral things. That should be up to parents. Now, too often we have relinquished that and handed that over to the government, and I understand how that happens. Life is hard. You have a lot of single parent homes. That's due to our mistakes. our sin. That's what leads to all of this. But I understand that life is hard, and sometimes you're just in a situation that it is what it is. These, I wouldn't necessarily say this is the hand you were dealt. Oftentimes, we were dealt a pretty good hand, and we gave that hand in for some bad cards on a gamble. That's kind of how I see life. But there's two verses I want to go to. I want to make this abundantly clear right now. I don't want anyone to think I'm pulling these verses out of context to try to prove something. I just noticed something, and I'm not necessarily building a doctrine, but I have an idea about something that's going on behind the scenes that is nefarious, and there is a conspiracy. And I've actually gone over this before. I did a video, I want to say about maybe 6 or 7 months ago, maybe longer, where I talked about a grand conspiracy, but that grand conspiracy wasn't an organization. It wasn't a group of people. It was the devil. And I believe that same thing applies right here, what I want to get into. So what I'm going to do is the first verse I want to go to is found in the book of Romans, but I just want to read a couple verses, and I want you to maybe see what I'm seeing. Maybe you won't. Maybe I'm bugging. Anyway, without further ado, let's get into this. All right, so in the book of Romans, chapter 1, I was just going to read verse 30, but I want to start at verse 28 because it kind of builds on what I'm talking about. And even as they did not like to retain God in their knowledge, God gave them over to a reprobate mind to do those things which are not convenient, being filled with all unrighteousness, fornication, wickedness, covetousness, maliciousness, full of envy, murder, debate, deceit, malignity, whisperers, backbiters, haters of God, despiteful, proud, boasters, inventors of evil things. And here's the thing that stood out to me: disobedient to parents. Now it goes on: without understanding, covenant breakers, without natural affection, implacable, unmerciful, who knowing the judgment of God, that they which commit such things are worthy of death, not only do the same, but have pleasure in them that do them. The disobedience of parents thing stands out to me for several reasons, and this is actually mentioned again. Let me look at my notes. I kind of took some impromptu notes here. It's mentioned again in the book of 2 Timothy chapter 3 verse 2, and I'm going to go there as well. But the funny thing is, a lot of these things are sexually immoral things, especially in this section of the book of Romans that is going over. So I kept thinking to myself, with many of these things, how does being disobedient to parents fit in? And why is this in here? At first glance, I was like, that really stands out. Maybe it's just me, and maybe I'm looking too deep into that. But then when you go to the book of 2 Timothy, what did I say? See, that quickly, I forgot where I was going. 2 Timothy chapter 3 and verse 2. So 2 Timothy, let me get to the 3. I'm going to start at verse 1 because it kind of does the same thing and it builds. And I'll probably read down just a little bit. This know also, that in the last days perilous times shall come, for men shall be lovers of their own selves, covetous, boasters, proud, blasphemers, disobedient to parents. Again, that stood out to me. Unthankful, unholy, without natural affection, truce breakers, false accusers, incontinent, fierce, despisers of those that are good, traitors, heady, high minded, lovers of pleasure more than lovers of God. There that comes up again. Having a form of godliness, but denying the power thereof, from such turn away. So, as I was thinking about that, thinking about those two verses, and thinking about what this the conclusions that this gentleman has come to, I kept wondering, like, what is really going on, let's say on a spiritual realm behind the scenes. So I'm not so much focused on the things I can see, right? Companies, organizations, politicians, presidents, prime ministers, members of parliament, congresswomen, congressmen, senator. I'm not focused on that. What about behind the scenes? You ever notice that in most conspiracies, and let's say grand government conspiracies that have been proven true, there's always a misdirect, right? There's always something that everyone is focused on, thus shifting their attention from what's really going on. And this is how the conspiracy is allowed to thrive. Now, there's some things, for the sake of YouTube, I'm not going to go over and discuss unless I get this Instagram page and my YouTube page nuked. I've already had 2 Instagram pages nuked. And I don't think I'm too animated or crazy and ridiculous in my comments. To this day, it baffles me how I got those 2 Instagram pages nuked, but they did. No warning. And I never got a legitimate explanation for why it happened. So I'm trying to watch my words here and be very measured in what I say. There is a group of people. Again, I was listening to the same gentleman this morning, and he went over this article where there's a group of people letting it be known that they want to indoctrinate children to accept their lifestyle. And I'm not going to mention a lifestyle. You can read between the lines. And so I was thinking about this some more, and I was thinking about those 2 verses, and I'm like, why does disobedient to parents come up in the book of Romans chapter 1 and in the book of 2 Timothy chapter 3 verse 2? Why does disobedient to parents come up among these really specific evil deeds? And a lot of them have to do with violence and sexual immorality. Like, why does that come up with those 2 things? So this is just my thought, and I could be completely off base with this. Kind of my thought on a spiritual conspiracy, I guess, so to speak. In the book of Revelation, chapter 12, verse 9, I'm just going to quote the verse. You can, go look it up. The Bible says, "And the great dragon was cast out, that old serpent called the devil and Satan, which deceiveth the whole world. He was cast out into the earth, and his angels were cast out with him." Now notice it said, he deceiveth the whole world. Now think about that. What is involved in deception? Deception, there is misdirects in deception. Things that you don't often see because you're kind of not focusing on that thing. It's the sleight of hand. I'm going to look up the word deception. Let's look it up. Let's see what it means. Oh, of course, it's not going to bring. Let's see. Maybe. I'm trying to look this up on my dictionary app, and it's giving me some problems. So let me open my secondary dictionary app. You always got to have 2. Always got to have redundancy and be prepared. So let's see. Deception. Okay. Deception, the act of causing someone to accept as true or valid what is false, or invalid, the act of deceiving, the fact or condition of being deceived. So, what have we seen going on in the past, let's say, well, I wouldn't. I don't want to. I don't want to say it that way. I was gonna say in the past, several years, but really, this has been going on since the beginning of time, right? We see what happened to Eve in the garden. Yea, hath God said? Right? This was deception. That's exactly what that was. Everybody is always focused on earthly things when it comes to deception. Is this the misdirect? I was thinking about this a lot, and I'm gonna tie in the whole idea of disobedience to parents, kind of what I'm thinking on that. But if you can get people to focus on what's happening physically with no what's the word I'm looking for, with no watchful eye on what goes on spiritually, that's a huge misdirect, right? That's a gigantic misdirect, because there's a lot of things that can be going on behind the scenes that people are just not paying attention to. We live in a time similar to other times. I don't like to, or I'm starting to correct myself about being so hyperbolic about this time. Like, this time is so unique that it has never happened before, right? Like when you see debauchery on a mass scale, um, many of us, especially believers, tend to act as though, oh my goodness, never in history has this happened. And it's like, bruh, have you ever read anything about Rome? Have you read anything about Greece? Yeah, their sexual immorality was pretty gross and on display for the whole world to see, and they just did not care at all. So it's not new, right? This is not a new thing. If you've read your Bible, you know of Sodom and Gomorrah. This is not new. Now, is it indicative of a certain time, things changing? Yeah, that's possible, but I'm trying to rein myself in from being so hyperbolic as though my time is so unique and these things have never happened before, because historically that's just not true. Okay, so with that said, I thought to myself, what is as a kid, where do you learn first about authority and restraints? You learn about this from your parents. That's where you learn it. That's where you get it. So then I thought to myself, okay, if I was a spiritual entity, a being bent on seeing the destruction of mankind, and I could move behind the scenes, and I had power on this earth, the first thing I would attack is I would go for children. Children are what's the word? Malleable, I believe is the proper word. I don't know if I'm using that incorrectly. I might be. I think that's the word. Children are they're like sponges, right? They're at the point, I'd say, from 1 years old to about 13 or 14. That's probably, now they're influenced even after that, but I think that's probably some of the most influential ages, right? Where you can really swing things one way or another. So then I thought, well, why are they pushing so many things in public school that in reality go in contradiction to what many parents believe? Now, I understand that there are some parents who support some of the things that go on in public school, but there's also a large number of parents who don't. So I could easily come to some conclusion that there's a grand conspiracy. There's some people in some dark corner of the world with a lot of money that meet in this room. evil laughter and they want to do X, Y, and Z. I'm not saying that's not impossible, but I'm saying, is that the misdirect, right? Are we so focused on that we're missing the spirit, missing the whole spiritual part of this, just absent? We're not thinking about what happens when a kid is trained to be disobedient to parents. That's your first line of authority. That's where you learn about authority. That's where you learn about restraints. What happens when you break apart that family unit that was meant to be a certain way? I understand that there are a lot of single parents, both men and women. I completely understand that. I understand that life happens. You can't dictate how life is going to play out. You can't control another person. Maybe you got married, you got with someone, you thought it was going to work, it didn't, and now one of you are single parents. But it's not supposed to be that way. This is not the way that God set this up. One of the first institutions you see set up in the book of Genesis is marriage. One of the biggest things attacked throughout history, I wouldn't say in just this time, maybe more now than in the past, but I don't know. I don't think so. One of the biggest things that's always attacked is the family. It is the family. What happens when you break that family apart? This is meant to work together. A man, a wife, and his children. There's certain things you get from that. I can tell you right now, just in watching my children, there are things that I missed out not having a father around that I can definitely see the difference in my kids. There's a certain confidence about them in certain situations. There's a certain wisdom about them in certain situations. There's just something different about how they perceive life and how they go about things than the way I did growing up. And I think having both me and their mom around and active, collectively for them has made a huge difference. Now, granted, I'm divorced. That's a whole nother thing. So that would lead me on a whole nother tangent. So I don't want to get on that, but just the whole idea of being disobedient to parents. Could it be that we are so bent on focusing on some nefarious plan that some group of powerful people have? Now, I'm not saying that the devil is not influencing powerful people. What I'm saying is, are we so focused on those people that we're missing what's really going on behind the scenes? If you can educate children and make them despise the thought processes and the values of their parents, you can tear a society down to the ground. And the Bible says, be sober, be vigilant, because your adversary, the devil, as a roaring lion, walketh about seeking whom he may devour. And when you read that verse in the book of the Revelation, it doesn't say anything about some nefarious group of people deceiving the whole world. It says, and the great dragon was cast out, that old serpent called the devil and Satan, which deceiveth the whole world. What happens when you don't have a proper sense of authority, even from a young age? When you don't understand authority correctly? This is something I think about often. Like, how many people would be more responsive or more receptive to the idea that there is a God that they must answer to? That's authority. There's a growing, I say growing, again, I'm trying not to make it seem like this has never happened in the past, but you definitely see an escalation and people that either proclaim that they're agnostic or atheists. Where is this starting? Are we better off for this? Now, those of us who are believers, we know the answer to that. No, we're not better off. And that's evidently clear. But I think this idea of being disobedient to parents, I think this is like, I'm trying to figure out how to say this. I think that's like a clue, a big glaring clue, something that maybe a lot of us are missing. Maybe we're so focused on these external things that nobody's looking at. How are children being brought up? Because as cliche as it sounds, children are the future, right? I don't know how long we have on this earth. I don't know how long the United States will be around. I don't know how long the earth will be structured socially, politically, the way it is now. I don't know. But let's say we have 100 more years of what we have going on now. Let's just say, for sake of argument, then the children will be what shapes what the world looks like 20 years from now, 30 years from now. All of the kids who are about, let's say, from age 5 to about 13, in 25 years, 25 to 30 years, these will be the people, for the most part, who are running the planet. Another 10 years from that, they will be the people that have the world's power structure. If you could influence their thought now, how much destruction could you wreak 25, 35 years from now? And if you can get people so focused on an organization or a company or this group or that group, and nobody's focused on what's being taught to children, what's being pumped into their brains, then you could easily do a lot of damage. And I wonder if that is exactly what's going on. Our adversary, the devil, has performed sleight of hand. We're so focused on these other things that nobody's turning and looking to the children and saying, wait a minute, why are people all of a sudden all believing this same thing? If you wanted to destroy a country, what would be the easiest way, right? Let's say you are, let's say, China, and you wanted to destroy the US. You probably wouldn't necessarily want to go to war. And I'm only using this analogy to kind of bring a physical look at what I believe is going on behind the scenes in a spiritual world, but we're not paying attention, right? So let's say you China, you don't want a nuclear war. Nobody wins in that instant, right? Okay, so you don't want that. You probably don't want to go to war unless you have to. You will if you have to, but you don't want to. But what you could do is you can influence the children. And if you can influence the children, you can dictate what that country will look like 20, 30, 40 years from now. And the same way, if we have an adversary that is out to see our destruction, if we have an adversary that cares nothing about us and just wants to see us forsake God and destroy everything he stands for, what would you do? Would you face independent adults who pretty much have their minds made up and formed on morality and authority and right and wrong, and they kind of have some restraints and some checks and balance? Or would you go to children and do everything in your power to remove that check and balance before it can ever be developed? I think that's the real nefarious plan. and something that is not really focused on much, because we're always focused on, now don't get me wrong, there's people who I believe are definitely have evil intentions, and I have mentioned on another podcast some of these people, but I'm starting to wonder to myself, are my eyes in the wrong place? We're so worried about a physical conspiracy that no one is paying attention. Oh, I say no one, that not many people are paying attention to the spiritual conspiracy. I think that might be the real travesty in everything we see going on in this world. Anyway, y'all know what it is. Stay frosty, people.